All right, how's everybody doing? Looks like I had the wrong banner up. Sorry about that. This is Psychology 150, not Psychology 241. How's everybody doing today? Thanks for coming. It's exam review time, and we're ready to go over the exam items. Looks like we have one person here so far. Anybody else in the chat bar? If you're here today, go ahead and type a hello in the chat bar and let me know how you're doing. I'm wondering if I've got some kind of technical problem. I would imagine that I'd have more students here. So let me see. Where is my phone? Oh, there it is right there. Okay, now we have a couple of people. Hello. I'm glad to see you here for the broadcast. My phone is right in front of me. I've got it now. Okay, Grant. Fantastic. All right. I just wanted to make sure I had the right broadcast. Now that I see 3 people are here, I at least know that we got the right broadcast going on. All right, so good morning. Welcome to the broadcast. Let's go ahead and good morning to you, Lynn. Good to see Lena. Good to you. Good to see you. All right, so let's go to Blackboard. All right. So, do you see me here in Blackboard? I am in the exams folder right now, and I am with the exam review format questions that you see. They should pop right in front of your head now. Let me see. There we go. Hopefully you've got them. Let's see. Do you see them now? Hopefully you see them now. Okay. So, the exam format. Let's see. Do we see the exam yet? Yes, it does look like we've got it. Okay, fantastic. Here we go. All right, so the exam is going to be 50 questions, multiple choice, matching questions, and true, false. It's going to cover chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, and you have 60 minutes to take this exam. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go over the questions in detail. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat bar, and I'll answer them just as soon as I see them. Okay. So let's go. Question number 50 on chapter 5. Chapter 5 was all about sensation and perception. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you about is I'm going to ask you about these structures in the retina. I want you to know what rods are. I want you to know what cones are. I want you to know what the fovea is. So the rods and cones are the receptor cells that are in your eye. They are photoreceptors. I want you to know they are located in this thing called the retina. When you are looking straight at something, it is directed to your fovea. The image is falling on your fovea. And I want you to know that the blind spot is the area in your retina where you have no rods and cone cells because you have the neurons leaving the eyeball, carrying information back to the brain. Okay. Now we've also got 2 questions on structures in the ear. The inner ear, the outer ear. I want you to know what the basilar membrane is. It's in the cochlea. It's got these hair cells that vibrate when they are interacted with by sound waves. Remember, your cochlea is a fluid-filled structure. And you have those three little inner ear bones, the hammer, mallet, and goodness me, I forget the other one. The hammer, the mallet, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Excuse me, the stirrup. Those three little bones. Remember, they vibrate on the oval window, creating sound. I want you to know the semicircular canals with their hair cells, and that they vibrate. That those hair cells vibrate to give you a sense of balance. I do have two questions on the differences between rods and cones. Remember, I want you to be familiar with the specific activities of rods and cone cells. Remember, cone cells are located almost exclusively in the fovea. They need a lot of light to work, but they have three different proteins that are differentially sensitive to light, so they give us the perception of color vision. I want you to know that your rod cells are more commonly located outside of the fovea, that is, in your peripheral vision. They're more sensitive to light, but they do not carry color information. They are black and white vision cells. I do want you to be able to answer two questions on that. Question number, let's see. There are three questions on locating the sensory cortices in the lobes of the brain. I want you to be able to tell me which lobes of the brain each of the cortices are. Taste and smell are in the frontal lobe. Taste and smell are in the frontal lobe. Hearing is in the temporal lobe. Your body is in your parietal lobe. Your somatosensory, your sense of touch, is in your parietal lobe. And your vision is in your occipital lobe. All right, so I want you to know those. So, taste and smell, hearing, touch, vision, and balance is in your cerebellum. I do reserve the right to ask you some questions about where these sensory structures are located. Remember, I am going to ask you to know that all of your senses are processed through the thalamus except for one. Can anybody tell me which of the five senses is not processed through the thalamus? Can anybody tell me? Anybody tell me which of the five senses is not processed through the thalamus? It's the only sense. And it was probably developed before the thalamus evolved. Does anybody know? I hope somebody types in the chat bar that it was the thalamus. We'll see. Okay, it looks like we have a lag going on today, so it's going to take me a while to get messages from the group. I apologize for that. Okay, let's see. Two general questions about hair cells. Okay, so the hair cells that are in your ears, I want you to know. There you go. Smell, fantastic. I want you to know I've got a little more detail about the hair cells that you'll find in your ear. And I want you to know the difference between sensation and perception. Remember, sensation is the processing of the information and the recording of it in your brain tissue. You perceived red, you sensed red, you sensed movement, you sensed something with a shape. Your decision that you were looking at fat, round Santa Claus is perception. That is the meaning you make out of these things. So that's 13 questions. So I've got 4 questions about the eyes. It looks like I've got 4 questions about the ear, 4 questions about the eye, 4 questions about the ear, 3 questions locating sensory cortices in the brain, and the difference between sensation and perception. So that's really what I wanted you to get from Chapter 5. Does anybody have any questions on what's in Chapter 5? Okay, hopefully not. Let me see. Hopefully not. Let me go back and see what we got. Okay, nothing. Okay. All right, let's go back to our review sheet. All right, let's move down a little bit to chapter 6. Chapter 6. Okay. Chapter 6 was on behaviorism. This is the one chapter that you had to watch recorded videos. I didn't do live videos this week. Okay, so what I really want you to get from this class is just an appreciation of the behaviorist perspective. Really, here's what I want you to get from this class. I want you to get three things. I want you to get a general appreciation for behaviorism. Okay. I want you to know specifically how operant and classical conditioning work. And then I want you to know the applications of behaviorism. So those are the three broad things that I'm asking about on this exam. All right. So let's go back to chapter 6. There are 13 questions. Hi. So there are 4 general questions about behaviorists. Remember, behaviorists were anti-mentalistic. Remember, they thought that learning was a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurred as a result of experience. Remember, they were nurturists rather than naturists. And remember that at least B.F. Skinner, the radical behaviorist, didn't put much stock in free will. He argued that we make no choices on our own. Instead, all of our choices are conditioned or trained into us by our environment. So just keep in mind, behaviorists, I want you to know the definition of learning: a relatively permanent change of behavior that occurs as a result of experience. Notice that there is nothing about the mind or thinking in that definition, because the behaviorists were not interested in cognitive processes. And it's definitely a model which is nurturistic. It gives power to your environment. And so much so that they really don't even believe in free will. Okay? Now, I want you to know a little bit about little Albert's case. And I want you to know what psych disorder John Watson trained into Albert, and how that applies to modern day clinical psychology. I notice we have a couple of people on the broadcast. Can anybody tell me what psychological disorder did John Watson train into little 2-year-old Albert? Can anybody tell me? Now, I do have one question, a matching question right here. There is a slide in PowerPoint 6A where we talk about the different parts of the learning process. We talked about behavior acquisition. That's as you are being conditioned to engage in the behavior and it becomes a little more frequent. We then talked about extinction. Behaviors that are not reinforced for long enough will start to disappear according to behavioral research. That's called extinction. Now, sometimes behaviors that have been extinguished will occasionally just pop up out of nowhere. It's almost as if the animal relearns them. And this is called spontaneous recovery. All right. And I do want you to know what's known as the partial reinforcement effect. When you use partial reinforcement in operant conditioning, when you use partial reinforcement as opposed to continuous reinforcement, behaviors tend to hang around a little bit longer before they are extinguished. Okay? Now, I've got 2 questions where I want you to know the difference between positive and negative reinforcers. And on the final exam, I'm going to want you to know the difference between positive and negative punishers. So you need to understand the difference between punishers and reinforcers. Okay, a punisher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 questions with examples of people's behavior being conditioned using operant conditioning. And what I want you to be able to do is to tell me whether or not they're using positive or negative reinforcers or positive or negative punishers. Remember, it's a reinforcer or or a reinforcer or a punisher based upon what's likely to happen to the behavior in the future. If a behavior is more likely to happen as a result of this consequence, then this consequence is known as a reinforcer. If a behavior is less likely to occur as a result of this outcome, you would say that it's a punisher. Now, having said that, there are positive and negative reinforcers and positive and negative punishers. So you can sometimes add something to cause a behavior to become more likely. I can give you extra credit every time you come to my webinar in this class. That's a positive reinforcer. On the other hand, you know what I could say? I could say that students who come to all of my webinars don't have to take the final exam. Now, not taking the final exam is removing something from you. But when I remove that something from you, it makes you more likely to engage in the behavior I want, which is coming to webinars. So that's the difference between a positive and a negative reinforcer. And you can do the same thing with positive and negative punishers. I can spank you if I catch you sneaking out of the house. If I'm your dad and I catch you sneaking out of the house, I can spank you. That's a positive punishment. I'm adding pain to your life. Or I can take your car keys away. That's taking away something you like because you snuck out. Both of those are designed to decrease the frequency of your behavior. So those are both punishers. Now, what I'm going to do on the exam is I am going to ask you a couple of questions where you will tell me the difference between reinforcers and punishers and positive versus negative. Now, if you go back and look on your homework, you'll notice that there is an exam where I have you match the parts of the classical conditioning demonstration to the example that I give you. And if you remember, there was a chart where I talked to you about unconditioned stimuluses, unconditioned reflexes, conditioned stimulus, and conditioned responses. Okay? So I'm going to use the exact same form as in your homework. So go back and look at your homework and look at that question and see exactly what I did there. And basically, I'm just going to describe a classical conditioning situation, and you're going to have to tell me what the UCS was, what the UCR was, what the CS is, and what the CR is. Okay? Now, again, as I talked to you earlier, I do want you to know about the partial reinforcement effect. So extinction of a learned behavior is a real thing. Almost all behaviors at some point will be forgotten, or the animal will quit engaging in the behavior if you quit reinforcing it. At some point, extinction does occur. However, research has shown that behaviors that are conditioned using partial reinforcement tend to resist extinction longer than ones that are conditioned with continuous reinforcement. So you can teach your dog to do a trick just by reinforcing some of the tricks, not all of the tricks. So partial reinforcement will cause learning to occur just like continuous reinforcement will. However, learning that occurs as a result of partial reinforcement tends to be more resistant to extinction. And then I have one question where I want you to be familiar with the subfields of psychology. Okay? So that's chapter 6, 13 questions there. Chapter 7, 12 questions. Okay? So, again, I'm going to give you one of those questions where I want you to be able to tell me that that's a cognitive psychologist and not a social psychologist. Remember, we're going to be hitting on these subfields throughout this semester. Every exam, I'm going to ask you about different subfields. And then when we get to the final exam, I'm going to ask you about these subfields again. So I want you to know what a developmental psychologist studies. We talked about developmental psychology. I want you to know what a cognitive psychologist studies. We talked about cognition in chapter 7. I want you to know what a psychometrician does. We talked about psychometrics yesterday in class. So I want you to know what each of these areas of specialization does. For me, it's one of the most important takeaways from this class. That and the areas of the brain that control our activities are the two things I really, really want you to know for this class. Okay? Now, let's see. So chapter 7, identify the cognitive subfield. All right, now, as I mentioned to you just 2 seconds ago, I am interested in you knowing brain areas. So I am going to ask you to know the different brain areas associated with the different parts of memory. That means the cerebellum for your well-learned procedural memories, the hippocampus and the temporal lobe are responsible for storing your explicit memories. I want you to know that your amygdala is implicated in classical conditioning and other emotional based memories. I am going to ask you that. And you should go ahead and learn this really well for this exam, because on your final, 10% of your grade will come down to your ability to know the areas of the brain. Okay? I do want you to, there's one question on the serial position effect. There's a chart in your PowerPoint. There's a slide in PowerPoint 7A with a U-shaped graph showing you that when we are given a list of words to remember, we tend to remember the first word in the list. We tend to remember the last word in the list. We tend not to remember the words that occur in the middle of the list. I want you to know what chunking is, and we talked about this with regard to the short-term memory. I want you to know what a schema looks like. I have 2 questions asking you what maintenance, or an elaborative rehearsal look like, and which one is better for your memory. So if you go in your book, you'll see an example of maintenance rehearsal and an example of elaborative rehearsal. And then I have 2 questions that are asking you about the general nature of memory. Remember, I said it's not an exact recording, it's a Wikipedia page. And then I have 1 question where I want you to identify the type of false memory. We talked about several different types of false memories, and I want you to be able to identify the example that I give you. Okay, and those are the 12 questions from chapter 7. Everybody understand that? Okay. I notice we're not having any questions. Is it that obvious? Or are you not engaged? Or are you just listening and taking notes? I don't know. Okay, we have a third person back in the list. Okay. Now, we just went over chapter 8 this week. 8 was IQ tests. There is 1 question where I ask you to know the definition of an intelligence test. I want you to know that Alfred Binet in France invented IQ tests around the turn of the 20th century. I want you to know which settings IQ tests are used in. Okay, I want you to know where you can use IQ tests. I want you to know that an IQ test is an aptitude test, and that aptitude tests are completely different things than achievement tests. Aptitude tests give us a general estimation of your learning ability, and achievement tests measure whether or not you learned a set of facts. One supposedly tests your intelligence, the other just tests your knowledge. I spent a lot of time on Tuesday talking about the different abilities that are measured in an IQ test and the difference between G and S as theories of IQ. Okay, so your intellectual functioning is not just one monolithic thing. You aren't just a good information processor, but in fact, we do different kinds of processing and there are different ability levels. So specifically, I suggested to you that human reasoning can be broken down into reasoning that involves words or verbal reasoning, and reasoning that does not involve words, logical and mathematical reasoning. And so the 2 types of reasoning abilities are typically thought of as verbal and nonverbal. There is a slide where we talk about the impact of genes on IQ, and I do want you to know that your genes play a very strong role in determining your IQ. Um, I do want you to know that IQ tests are used for identifying learning disorders. And then I have a question where I give you somebody's IQ score, and I want you to be able to tell me if they are gifted, average, or have an intellectual deficiency. Remember, 85 to 115 is thought of as average in IQ. 115 to 130 is above average. Uh, 85 to 70 is below average. Above 130, that's two standard deviations. The top 2.5% are seen as gifted. And on the other end of the spectrum, if you score below 70, the bottom 2%, and you have trouble taking care of yourself, you can't live on your own, then you might be given the diagnosis of intellectual deficiency. There's a little chart on the criticisms of IQ tests. I want you to know that some people think that IQ tests are biased against different ethnicities, and that IQ tests don't measure all of what it means to be intelligent. Now, I think it was in PowerPoint 8A, I told you the different types of IQ tests. The Wonderlic is a very popular business test. The ASVAB is the IQ test that's used by the military. I want you to know the Woodcock-Johnson is the most popular paper and pencil test. And I want you to know that the Stanford-Binet was the first IQ test. There's a chart where I have the different types of IQ tests. There's one question where I want you to match the IQ test to its setting, where you would use it. I do want you to know that there are ethnic differences in IQ score. What these differences represent, we don't 100% know. And there's one question where I give you an example, and I want you to tell me if I'm talking about the reliability or the validity of the IQ test. Remember, reliability is the degree to which the measurement tool gives you the same measurement every time you measure the same thing. If my bathroom scale is reliable, every time I step on it, it will give me the same measurement over the next. If I was to step on it 10 times today, it would give me the same measurement. That's reliability. IQ tests, every time we measure the same person, we want to get the same measurement. That's a quality of tests. The second one is, does the test measure what we think it measures? Does it measure it accurately? And that's where some people really disagree with the IQ test. They say it doesn't measure all of what it means to be intelligent. We leave out important parts of intelligence like creativity and common sense. So some people would argue that the IQ test is not a valid measure of intelligence. All right. And then I have a couple of examples of Gardner's and Sternberg's test, and I want you to tell me if I'm talking about Gardner or Sternberg or EQ. Okay? So that represents everything I had to say about this exam. Do you folks have any questions for me? Not a lot of people came today. That worries me. I hope everybody's going to do well on this exam. Again, I just want to reiterate now over the course of this semester, learn the brain parts and the subfields of psychology. If you know the brain parts and the subfields of psychology perfectly, that will be like 15 to 17% of your final exam. So I want you to know that the cerebellum is involved in balance and well-learned procedural memories. I want you to know that the medulla is responsible for breathing and heart rate. I want you to know that corpus callosum is the band of tissues that connects the left and right hemispheres of your brain. I want you to know that your visual cortex is in your occipital lobe and that your gustatory and olfactory cortices are in your frontal lobe. along with Broca's area, which is where language is produced. I want you to know that the fusiform gyrus in your temporal lobe is the part of your brain that recognizes faces. I want you to know that the amygdala is responsible for basic emotions, but it's controlled by your frontal lobe, which controls your personality and your impulses. I'm going to want you to know all those different brain areas, and then I'm going to want you to know what a biological psychologist studies, what a developmental psychologist studies, what a cognitive psychologist studies, what a clinical psychologist does, what a health psychologist does. If you know these things on your final exam, you've already got 17% of your exam knocked out. So as we go through the semester, every time I introduce a brain area, do your best to remember what that brain area does. By the way, can anybody tell me what the suprachiasmatic nucleus does? Can anybody tell me what the suprachiasmatic nucleus is for? Does anybody know? I'd be curious. I'd be curious. Hey, can anybody tell me what brain structure all of the senses except smell run through? Does anybody know the answer to those two questions? I'd be curious. If you do, go ahead and type it in the chat bar. So that brain structure, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it gets light information from your eyes and coordinates your sleep and wake cycle to the sun. Do you remember that from chapter 3? That's a brain area I want you to know. Okay. And then the structure that all of your senses except smell go through is your thalamus. I promise you, I'm going to ask you about these on the final, so you need to know them. All right, I see we have no questions in the chat bar, so I think everybody probably has the information that they want or don't want. I'd like to thank you for coming today. Good luck on the exam this weekend, and I will have the attendance grades updated later this afternoon. Take care and have a great day. Bye.